Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Marc Purcell. I'm co-chair of AP4D, and I'm really pleased to welcome you here to today's symposium to launch a new AP4D paper. What does it look like for Australia to enhance its Indian Ocean engagement? I'm here in Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, but I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on all around Australia, and also Indigenous peoples further afield if you're joining us from overseas. We're delighted to have you here, and also a warm welcome from my co-chair, who's an apology today, Michael Wesley, and the rest of the AP4D advisory group. In terms of what we'll be going to be doing this afternoon, I'll tell you a little bit about AP4D and what's behind it, why it was formed. Then the lead on this paper and bringing it together, Grant Wyeth, will give us an overview of the process that produced the paper, as well as a summary of its key points. And then we're going to go over and hear from a panel of experts that contributed to the paper. And then finally, we're delighted that the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tim Watts, will conclude the proceedings with the policymakers' response to the paper. So just some housekeeping before we go forward. Q&A is enabled, so please use this throughout, and we'll use it to get into the Q&A section. And it's also being live captioned, so you can view the captions by clicking the Show Captions icon in the meeting controls in the toolbar. That's the CC. So AP4D started 4 years ago and was really brought together by thinkers, researchers, policymakers who wanted to see a greater coherence in Australia's what we now call statecraft, and bringing the defence community, security community, diplomatic communities and international development communities, which drive a lot of our engagements at different levels of societies that we engage with. And there was a real energy around this and a real salience at the times. And so we were very pleased that we had initial funding from the Australian Civil Military Centre, and then further funding from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And that's really turbocharged a whole series of papers and research and blogs and think pieces that brings together these three communities on applied topics. Some are very big, like whole of nation approach to statecraft that we launched a few weeks ago, and others are quite applied on illegal maritime fisheries or Australia's relationship with Timor-Leste. But the work overall is having an impact in increasing understanding and a desire to use all tools of statecraft and whole of nation with policymakers, with government, around a very complex geostrategic environment that Australia faces at the moment. We've got support from across the political spectrum, from Foreign Minister Wong and Shadow Minister Birmingham recently at the launch of the Whole of Nation paper. But we're also seeing that a lot of our thinking and key messages is being reflected in policy documents such as the Defence Strategic Review, the International Development Policy, just to name a couple. We've produced over 20 papers so far, and some of them have touched on the Indian Ocean region, but this is the first dedicated paper that AP4D has looked at exclusively on our region. The Indian Ocean is of growing consequence to Australia, the countries around it, in many, many different ways: economic, strategic, diplomatic, developmental, environmental, and also, of course, with diasporas. But it's increasingly clear that there are many overlapping challenges that go along with the opportunities for Australia in our region, into the Indian Ocean region. And sometimes they can be overshadowed by the Australian foreign policy imagination, by Southeast Asia and the Pacific too. So this paper is a bit of a corrective to that. It's an important and timely contribution, we hope, as it outlines how Australia can use all tools of statecraft to help address regional challenges, capitalise on regional opportunities, and contribute more into regional stability and prosperity. And it couldn't have happened without the vision of the Australian Military Centre, Civil Military Centre. We're very grateful for their long-standing support through shaping a shared future program, of which this paper is part. So before we hear from Grant Wyeth about the paper and processes that led to it, let me now hand over to Nicola Rosenblum, the Executive Director for the Australian Civil Military Centre, to speak about why the Centre got involved with AP4D and why ACMC chose to support this particular piece of work. Over to you, Nicola.
Thanks so much, Mark, and lovely to see you all here today. Can I please acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you from today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations persons joining us on the online today. The Australian Civil Military Centre's role is to build engagement, knowledge and understanding across civilian, military and police sectors. And as part of that mandate, we foster and support research which brings together those diverse perspectives. Many of you will be aware that last week the Deputy Prime Minister launched Australia's inaugural National Defence Strategy, which lays out a coordinated approach to defending Australia and advancing our interests. Now, that strategy makes clear that defence is just one part of a broader whole of government and whole of nation approach that harnesses all arms of Australia's national power to advance our interests. And AP4D's ethos of bringing together voices from defence, diplomacy and development and other communities to consider challenging policy issues really aligns well with that approach. The National Defence Strategy also reaffirmed that Australia's primary area of interest is our immediate region, which encompasses the Northeast Indian Ocean through to maritime Southeast Asia and into the Pacific. And so in that context, ACMC was really pleased to support AP4D's consideration of how Australia can strengthen its Indian Ocean engagement. The report we're about to hear today sets out the strategic risks and also some of the opportunities for Australia in the Indian Ocean and identifies pathways for greater engagement over a broad range of policy areas. So I know I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists today, and thanks everyone for joining.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicola, for that. And we greatly appreciate the support that ACMC has provided us. And welcome everyone to the launch of the latest AP4D paper, which is on strengthening Australia's Indian Ocean engagement. Over the past 5 months, we've engaged with a number of experts from both Australia and the region on the importance of the Indian Ocean to Australia, gathering a range of different ideas and perspectives that we've synthesized into this options paper. This began with an initial dialogue in October with a number of feature speakers and other fantastic contributions as well. This then moved on to the working group process. And here we have the contributors to the paper listed here, and we greatly thank all of them for the work they've done and the time that they've dedicated to spend making this the paper that it is. Although the paper is now live on our website for you to read, I thought I'd give a brief overview of some of the key findings that have come out of these consultations. So Australia is obviously a Pacific-heavy country, but there is a strong recognition that the Indian Ocean is increasingly important to us. This is reflected in recent policy documents like the National Defence Strategy that reiterates Australia's immediate region as consisting of the Pacific, Southeast Asia and the Northeast Indian Ocean. Of course, it is not like Australia isn't already engaged in this region. We have long-standing relationships that are being advanced, and new diplomatic posts like that in Maldives signal Australia's attempt to consolidate and enhance its presence in the region. What this paper seeks to inspire is an expansion and deepening of this cooperation. Although we prefer to be positive and forward-looking in our papers, part of this process has to be the identification of barriers. So there is a recognition that Australia is a middle power of limited resources and that the immediate region that the Australian government has identified is incredibly large. We also need to acknowledge that Australia's northwest, the region closest to the Northeast Indian Ocean, lacks the population and infrastructure to project power and influence. Alongside this, South Asia is an incredibly complex region that requires an intense amount of work to know, understand, and engage with genuinely. And the current regional multilateral architecture is not as advanced and effective as it could be. However, despite this, what this paper seeks to convey is that South Asia and the Indian Ocean more broadly presents Australia with enormous opportunities. Much of Australia's recent focus has been on India, which is essential given its size and rising influence. But due to its population and recent strong economic growth, Bangladesh should also be considered an emerging power in its own right and a relationship worthy of considerable investment. Other relationships like Sri Lanka and Maldives are critical for stability in the region and maritime domain awareness. In a region of complex history and trust deficits, there is especially the opportunity for Australia to become a trusted partner and a broker on issues of regional importance. Our paper sets out a broad vision of what our consultees see as a positive or idealized version of Australia's regional engagement. This includes greater regional integration through economic opportunities and people-to-people links. Given the large youth populations in the region, strong support for education, youth opportunity and leadership, and of course, greater coordination on climate change, adaptation and mitigation, as well as furthering defence cooperation. Alongside this vision, we include a series of pathways as policy recommendations. There are 15 in total, but I thought I would highlight a few. So the first being establishing reserve unit relationships with small island states in the Indian Ocean, similar to the US's State Partnership Program, which facilitates cooperation on civil military affairs. Alongside this, prioritizing building interoperability in maritime domain awareness. This can be enhanced through the Quad's existing project on maritime domain awareness through the provision of satellite data to existing centres in Madagascar and Seychelles. Enhancing our presence of defence attaches in the region. This includes with small island states and also with East African countries as well to provide a holistic understanding of the Indian Ocean. And of course, leveraging the rapidly growing South Asian diaspora in Australia and recognising that these are people who have intimate knowledge and links within the region that government currently may not have. Alongside this, well, flowing on from diaspora links is really the enhancing the education footprint in the region, Australia's education footprint in the region. There are obviously positive steps that are already being taken place through the establishment of university campuses and partnerships in the region, but we should see these as starting points to be expanded upon. This also includes recognising the importance of the Australia Awards and New Colombo Plan to enhance regional literacy. And another critical issue for the region is illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. And we've recommended that the establishment of regional agreements to deny port entry to out-of-area illegal fishing vessels, which would make ventures from China and South America into the Indian Ocean less economically viable. So that's a brief overview of the paper. And I encourage everyone to visit our website after the symposium and to have a read of it for yourselves. But alongside this, we have three of our contributors to the paper here for a panel discussion. So we have Professor Lailufar Yasmin from the University of Dhaka. We have Jennifer Parker from the ANU National Security College and the University of New South Wales, Canberra, and Professor Jack Corbett from Monash University. So we're privileged to have these people here today to share their expertise. And I know that we have a lot of other experts in the region on the call as well. So there will be time for questions after the initial panel discussion. So I encourage everyone to put their questions as the panel discussion goes along, to put their questions in, use the Q&A function to bring forth any questions that you would like to be answered. So I'll just stop sharing my screen. And I'll come to you, Jen, first. So what do you see as the primary security challenges for Australia in the Indian Ocean region, and where do these align with other regional partners?
Hey, Grant, and thanks so much for inviting me to be on this panel, and congratulations to yourself and AP4D on the paper. I think increasingly in certainly discourse about Australia's security, the Indian Ocean is flagged, but there's not a lot of core recommendations as to how you address our vulnerabilities in the Indian Ocean and balance them against what you mentioned, Grant, in terms of, our constraints, right? So we have a constrained defence budget, we have a constrained foreign aid budget. But to get up to your question, look, there is a broad range of issues in the Indian Ocean, and specifically when you look at maritime security, Australia, obviously, the longest Indian Ocean coast, as you mentioned in your paper, really is impacted by the maritime security in the Indian Ocean region. And whether that is non-traditional elements such as illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, whether that is irregular migration, whether that is the impacts of climate change, also on Australia, but also on some of the island nations within the Western Indian Ocean, which are highly exposed to those changes. It really does impact us. So I think in terms of asking the question, what are the most significant issues that impact in the region? Look, it really depends on who you are. From an Australian perspective, I'd say we have significant concerns about illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing and what that does to our marine environment. And also, clearly we have concerns about irregular migration. And if you think about our extensive Indian Ocean coast, it is one of our most exposed coasts. As you mentioned, in your intro, certainly in the northwest area, we don't have a lot of population there, so it is hard for us to deal with those threats. I think Australia also needs to be cognizant, though, on the competition that is occurring between China and India in the Indian Ocean. It was pleasing to see the National Defence Strategy actually articulate this for the first time, because that also has a significant impact on Australia. If you think about our sea lines of communication, although we have our primary area of focus articulated in the NDS, think about Australia's fuel. 91% of Australia's fuel is imported. That can't be stated enough. And although in a refined state, that comes from Southeast Asia, in an unrefined state, that comes across the Indian Ocean. So competition between China and India in the Indian Ocean that puts potentially those sea lines of communication at risk has a dramatic impact on Australia.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jen. You mentioned there about small island states as well, so I might move on to Jack here. So how do the small island states in the Indian Ocean see their primary security challenges, both in terms of traditional security and human security? And I guess, what are the unique challenges that these islands face as well?
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, thanks for having me as well. Really great paper, and really good to see the Indian Ocean small islands featured in this way. For someone who's spent so much time studying small islands, the Australians tend to focus on the Pacific, the Brits tend to focus on the Caribbean, and the Indian Ocean states, as well as the African small island states, tend to get forgotten, which is a bit of a shame, because obviously on one hand they're intrinsically interesting, but also because in terms of the global SIDS agenda, these have really been leading states, pushing this agenda through the various international organizations in which it's become prominent. And the reason for that essentially is because of the uniqueness, which I guess forms the second part of your question. At independence, or at the decolonization period, the question surrounding small island developing states was how they were going to be viable economically, particularly in that context where plantation agriculture was still the primary industry that they engaged in. Tourism has emerged since to create, at least in the Indian Ocean small islands, quite enviable levels of economic development and growth, but it's an incredibly volatile industry, as we saw with COVID, as we saw in the GFC. And so economic diversification is the primary concern, and that speaks to the broader security challenge or dilemma that these small islands face. On the one hand, rising great power competition and the importance of this maritime transit and so forth creates a real opportunity for them to leverage and diversify their economic development prospects in much the same way as Pacific small island states can. But at the same time, these are countries which by and large don't have their own military, and if they do, it's very small. And so the prospect of great power competition really is a real existential threat to them in the same way that it has been in previous eras. So that's the dilemma they face, a short-term need to leverage and a medium-term concern that leverage may turn into a real catastrophe. In a sense, they can balance that by participation in multilateral institutions, be they regional or global, and that's where we've really seen the Indian Ocean small states take a leadership role, particularly through AOSIS and on climate issues, but also more generally in relation to the economic problems that they face. And I guess if we sort of skip forward a little bit and think about how Australia might work constructively with these states, I think there's a real potential for collaboration and cooperation in terms of maintaining that liberal, rules-based international order, which is essential to their security and survival.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Jack. I might move on to Lailufar to get a bit of a Bangladeshi perspective here. So what are the current, I guess, developmental ambitions of Bangladesh, and what are the current primary challenges that Bangladesh is facing?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. And more than that, thank you for including Bangladesh in this discussion. Often Bangladesh is ignored and we do not get to share our perspectives in a larger scale, in a global scale, as Australia has been doing for recent times, bringing Bangladesh at the forefront of discussion of the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific issues. So Bangladesh, as you said very rightly, it can be called as a middle power in the regional sense, that Bangladesh has shown in many occasions that in the issues connected to its national interest, it has a uncompromising attitude that in the case of UNGA voting or in the case of a few other issues. So Bangladesh is obviously keeping in mind of 2026 graduation from the LDC category. Bangladesh has a number of challenges that it has to take into account. But more than all of those issues, I feel that, as we discuss internally, that diversification of our export basket, that is one of the primary challenges. See, we have RMG and manpower. That is our main, these two are our main strengths. And in terms of manpower, we basically export unskilled labor, one in the Middle East and other in the Southeast Asian region. So here we need to produce more skilled manpower and ensure their safe and easy environment. But at the same time, internally, Bangladesh produces the second largest online labor worldwide. India is the first country that produces most online labor. So as I can see from and learn from different sources, that Bangladesh's online skilled sort of personnel, they also work heavily with Australian online platforms. Then of course we have second challenge is diversification of our export destinations. Our exports are heavily dependent on Western countries such as United States of America, Europe, Australia. In Asia, our largest export destination, export partner is Japan. So we need to sort of diversify these destinations as well. Third, I would argue that overall having a sort of development that has that connects the rural and urban areas equally. So we have that particular kind of challenges. We are having tremendous infrastructural development, and if you from the outside, when you hear a lot of negative reports, you may think you may feel concerned about Bangladesh's future. But when you live here every day, living and interacting with people, you can see how people here have entrepreneurial mind and they come up with easy solution to everything. This is a strength that we have, but we are not being able to sort of portray this or cash this to the rest of the world.
That's great. I might stick with you just for one follow-up question there. And so how do you think is Australia best placed to partner with Bangladesh on these issues that Bangladesh requires?
Thank you. I am an Australian PhD holder. I did my PhD from Macquarie. So I saw that how, Macquarie University in Sydney, like every few minutes you hear someone arguing in Bangla thinking that people wouldn't understand their language. So this is one area that Australia has done great. That we send a lot of skilled people over there. Many of us, we do return back to our country, but some, of course, they do not come back. But then in the area of particularly ocean area, Australia is doing great in maritime domain awareness training. So David is working here with local partners, but I feel that this is an area that need to be more enhanced and it needs more broadening. Maritime domain awareness should not remain within the direct stakeholders, but there should be something that will bring more awareness outside of the practitioners. So it needs to be intimated. It needs to be known to broader audience. So this is one area, and of course in the area of climate change, sea level rising, and especially in the Sundarban area that we have the largest mangrove forest and the kind of rising salinity in that area, and particularly the development of the coastal belt. these are some of the areas that Australia can work on. And one other thing that the Bay of Bengal has a very difficult sort of in terms of temperature rising, and in terms of this I forgot the name. There's a dead zone in the Bay of Bengal, which is expanding very fast. So this is one area. So while Australia is already engaged in MDA, but at the same time we need more science and technology related assistance to tackle some of the work. And here Australia can train up our people. And one other last issue that I'd like to mention, that we have a number of training institutes for maritime different kind of jobs. So if our training institutes could align, and there could be potential to do joint degree sort of system that they will learn here, maybe they will do their some of the work in Australia, and together they will have sort of MOU of a joint degree, and then Bangladeshi skilled personnel with a double degree in a particular area, in the marine related area, they will have more acceptability in different countries. So this is one other area that Australia can think about cooperating and collaborating.
That's great, thank you. And I suspect there's a lot of people on the line at the moment who are in a position to be thinking about these issues with the Australian-Bangladesh relationship as well. So that's good food for thought for them. I might come back to Jack, and just moving on to, I guess, Australia's relationships with regions. So I guess what are how is Australia best placed to forge kind of better relationships with the small island states in the regions, and how does it kind of can be assistance with their challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I would start, and some people have already sort of alluded to this in the Q&A, I think, with the regional institutions. We're in a fortunate position being part of the RIM Association, can always be working with other regional organizations, particularly when it comes to small states. These are institutions that can help with the capacity problems that they're trying to overcome, and help them burden share and so forth. So I think working with regional institutions is always a positive in the context of small states, but particularly so when you're thinking about security issues, given that, as I've said, trying to bolster the multilateral system and a rules-based international order is key to their survival in a context in which they don't have significant military strength. So in that sense, international level institutions are really important as well. I think the final thing to think about here, though, is, and it sort of comes back to what we started with in relation to talking about Australia as a Pacific-focused country. Obviously, these are different regions, and the island states in each region are different, but at the same time, they share pretty marked similarities, which the global SIDS agenda tries to articulate and address. So Australia has a lot of relevant knowledge and expertise that it can draw on, and it also has the potential to play a really key, I think, facilitation and linkage role between regions of small states, including those that are on either side of its borders. So I would see that kind of facilitation and this sort of creation and funding of opportunities for what we broadly call in the development sphere South-South cooperation as to being really integral to the types of things, the types of value add that Australia can provide.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I think that's critical observation there about Australia's expertise in the Pacific, how that can translate into the Indian Ocean. So I'll come back to Jen for the final question before we go to audience questions. So Jen, where do you see the current opportunities for Australia to enhance security cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, and where can Australia get most bang for its buck?
No, thanks for the question. I know actually in the chat there are a number of questions that kind of go to the multilateral initiatives in the Indian Ocean region. And I think Australia does and has a history of trying to support them, right? But I think the challenge with the Indian Ocean region is it is so vast and it is so diverse. So I do think, and there might be many in the audience who disagree, so I look forward to the questions, but I do think there is a limit to how much the large multilateral organisations such as IORA can achieve. And I think Australia needs to be cognizant of that in its approach and look at harnessing some of those bilateral relationships. And I think that's why it was really good to see things like in the Defence Strategic Review last year that the DCP would be expanded to certain elements of the Indian Ocean region and some of that bilateral engagement. I think the Quad is a great opportunity as well for Australia to harness some of its close relationships to kind of get bang for buck in the region. Because, you know, as we mentioned before, Indian Ocean security does impact Australian security, but we do only have limited resources. So it was pleasing to see in the paper, one of the key recommendations was looking at how the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative through the Quad, for example, could be rolled out to assist in the Indian Ocean, you know, through things like the provision of RF data to track ships. So I think that there are plenty of opportunities. I think that we need to work hard to support that multilateral framework. So there is a key place for organisations such as IORA, which does some great work, especially recently in areas like maritime safety. But I think we need to acknowledge as well that in a region so vast that there does need to be more bilateral engagement with a number of these countries and really getting after some of their significant issues. So it's great to talk about maritime domain awareness. It's even greater to assist in achieving maritime domain awareness. But when you think about the maritime domain, if you're aware of what's happening, you're aware of the rate of illegal fishing, irregular migration, smuggling, but you don't actually have the capacity to deal with what you're aware of, then you're only solving half of the problem. And, you know, Australia has a great history of assisting Pacific Island nations with capability. You know, Australia actually donated a number of patrol boats to Sri Lanka over the years. So also looking at how we can find out what are some of the challenges in those Indian Ocean countries and what capacity and what capability can we provide to assist. Because it's great to be aware of the issues and be trying to assist understanding of the issues, but in the end, we've actually got to try and address them as well. So I think there's some opportunities there in understanding what capability issues some of those countries may have and how Australia can assist.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. And so I'm hoping that there's a couple of questions in the Q&A section now that are on IORA. Yeah, I think that you spoke to that quite well. Just on the question, I think Pakistan being ignored, I think at the moment, I think the Australian government draws a line on the west coast of India as where it sees the Northeast Indian Ocean. So that doesn't exclude Pakistan from not being an important country, but I think it at the moment it's not prioritised in Australia's vision of what is the Northeast Indian Ocean. I might just before there's a question there on languages, but I might come back just to regional organizations as well and maybe get Lailufar's perspective on organizations like SAARC and BIMSTEC and how they are viewed from a Bangladeshi perspective.
Thank you. It's quite a difficult question because, you know, as spoken by some of the speakers, that South Asia is a really complex region. It's not that I'm trying to elevate South Asia's geopolitical significance by saying this, but as you can see that collaboration among actors have rarely worked. SAARC is almost stalled. SAARC is not functioning except for some of the sort of very low non-traditional issues, low impact non-traditional issues. And in terms of BIMSTEC, it started with a lot of potentials, and it has divided its task into regional sort of into some country partners. Despite that, for some reason, both of the organizations, they lack cohesiveness, they lack cooperation, collaborative mindset. So there were a lot of euphoria at the beginning, but unfortunately that didn't work out. And one thing I would like to point out that I sort of forgotten to mention, that one other area that I would like to like Australia to come in Bangladesh and in broader in Indian Ocean region, that we have very little number of maritime search and rescue operation related ability. So this is something I would like to flag here, that in the entire Indian Ocean region, I think Singapore has one, India has one, and probably that's it. So this is something that Australia can work with, this Indo side of the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lailufar. I'll move on to, there's a question here on the security risks of climate change for the region, how Australia might be best able to assist. I might go to Jack first to get a perspective on how the small island states kind of view climate change and what I guess, initiatives can Australia pursue with those states?
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, some of the most pressing challenges come from Bangladesh. But anyway, I can talk about the islands, and I guess I alluded to this very briefly in relation to the way that Indian Ocean small island states have pushed their agenda through the Alliance of Small Island States at the international level, and that's been particularly in relation to climate change. In fact, the idea that we talk about this group of small island developing states has really come about because of the threat of climate change and because of the activism of countries in the Indian Ocean in particular. It sort of varies a little bit by island nation. Obviously, Maldives is a low-lying atoll state. I guess for those listening more familiar with the Pacific, it's more similar to Marshall Islands or Kiribati or Tuvalu. And so there's the existential threat of sea level rise, which is very immediate for that group. But islands in general are highly vulnerable to climate change, either because of the biodiversity loss or because of the impacts it's likely to have on the tourism sector, because of the impacts it will have on rainfall patterns and so forth. So these are really huge potential challenges for these islands, and why they've mobilized so successfully at the international level to draw attention to their issues. So I guess if we're to sort of try and securitize that, and there's a big debate about whether we should be securitizing climate in this way, it would be through that human security lens and the impact that that climate change is likely to have on human security for small islands.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jack. I might throw that question to Lailufar as well, because Bangladesh has its own unique challenges with climate change as well, which are quite distinct. So do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Currently we are going through a heat wave, something that we have not seen in past, decades, several decades. So we are increasingly seeing that the rate of deforestation is quite high. What kind of development are we having? Are we integrating the local needs, or are we just simply copying and pasting the Western model of development? So these are some of the challenges that we need to think in relation to climate change. And as I pointed out, that often when we talk about coastal region and the kind of climate change that is happening. So you see, people living in the coastal region, they have very little to survive with. They do not understand what will happen down the road 10 years or 50 years later. So we need to educate them, people, about the challenges that might happen in future and what can we do at the present. So we have this, we need to grow this notion that we need to go to people, and we need to sort of the rural urban disconnect that exists now. We need to sort of mend that, and we need to, it is a more sort of, it needs to be bottom up approach instead of policymakers sitting in Dhaka telling people what to do. So we need more center periphery connection instead of sort of making policy here. So this is one area that I find that is a huge gap. Not only in Bangladesh, but maybe in other parts of the world, that we often fail to take into account of the local priorities, and therefore they don't care about climate change or deforestation or all of these issues, because for them to be able to put food on the table for the day is a challenge. So they do not think that 10 years down the road there will be less rainfall or there will be desertification. So we need to increasingly understand this, prioritize this, and this is a long-term process. It cannot happen in 5 years or 10 years. It has to be in your books, in your sort of school level, college level books, and you have to make people more aware of this. And at the same time, I would like to point out that when we are talking about regional organization and how Bangladesh can sort of work with SARC or a BIMSTEC, one thing that has already been, Bangladesh is in cooperation with Japan and India in terms of developing connectivity and energy sector. So we have seen in this region a unique thing that we need not only internal integration, but we need an external actor as a guarantor. So I think Australia can come forward with its own plan, and then do like connecting several countries of the region together, and then it will be better, because when we are talking about climate change, Sundarban is connected with the West Bengal. We share the same sort of geography. So we need this kind of connection where an external partner, their knowledge, their assurance, their guarantee will help this kind of work go on.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Lailufar. And so speaking of external actors, we've got a couple of questions, one on the US and one on France. So I might put this to Jen about how Australia can collaborate with those, I guess, those non-resident powers that still have significant impacts in the region.
Yeah, look, thank you. Thank you for the question. Look, I think the good news is Australia is collaborating with a number of partners in the region, including the US and France. And in fact, you know, one of the criticisms of Australia's approach to the Indian Ocean region for a long time has been that it really delegated a lot of its security in the region to the US. I think it has been pleasing to see, you know, that increasing trilateral between Indonesia, France, and Australia. And I think that's quite important. In terms of how we can collaborate with them in the future, look, I think when it comes to France, you know, and I know, I think Dr. Frederick Greer is online. I'm just going to give a plug for his National Security College series where he's talking about how we can work with France in the Indian Ocean region. I think we need to remember that, you know, France has a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, you know, and a lot of invested interest. So, you know, understanding from them where they see some of the challenges and where they see Australia can best collaborate and slot in. You know, we've talked a little bit about maritime domain awareness and we've talked about the Quad, but France also does a lot of work there in terms of IORIS in Crimea. So there's two acronyms that I'm not going to be able to explain, but Google them. And so understanding how we can support that architecture that they are rolling out across the Indian Ocean as well, I think is key. And this really is kind of gets to the heart of Australia's approach to the Indian Ocean. We do have a limited capacity. We do have a number of challenges, and we are a 3-ocean country. So we do need to leverage the existing partners and understand how we slot into what they're trying to achieve and how we can value add. I think certainly with the US and France, there is a lot there in the maritime domain that we can work with them on.
I guess following on from that question, there's a question on the Quad here. So how does that collaboration work with India as well? You know, you've got these kind of big kind of non-resident powers who are significant, but then you've got an emerging power that sees the Indian Ocean really as its kind of lake in a way as well. So how does the Quad work in terms of regional security?
Look, I think the Quad is a really good example in terms of, you know, I mentioned before, how should Australia approach a number of these challenges? And it really is through that kind of, to steal a term from what is applied to Southeast Asia, that lattice framework. So I think that we need to engage on the multilaterals, the multilaterals, and on a bilateral basis. The Quad has a lot of opportunity for Australia in terms of both India's understanding of the region, but also in terms of that cost sharing and that capacity sharing. And that's one of the things that is being sought to do through the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness. But as the question highlights, we do need to be cognizant that we do have some differing strategic views than India, and also how India is viewed in a number of the specifically Western Indian Ocean islands, which, you know, I think Jack can probably talk to. David Brewster has done a lot of work on. So I think we need to leverage that relationship, which is, you know, a growing in strength and strength. You just need to look at the National Defence Strategy. It talks about India as a top tier security partner. But we also need to match that with having those bilateral relationships with a number of those states where India might have a degree of baggage, which may preclude some of their engagement on some of the things we want to get after, specifically in the security and the maritime domains.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. I might pivot now. We've got another question on the bilateral or multilateral institutions, but I might go back to Lailufar to talk. We've got a direct question for you about the diaspora and how the diaspora can be leveraged better. I mean, you mentioned that Bangladesh kind of exports a lot of low-skilled labor, and then a lot of the high-skilled labor, you know, it does return, but some doesn't return. So what would Bangladesh see as its ideal kind of outcome here in terms of its diaspora?
Yeah, the first thing, I'll have recommendation on removing this Bangladesh blindness or Bangladesh oversight in different countries, because often in the international media, all we see about Bangladesh is political violence or disaster or all this sort of negative attention that is given to Bangladesh. So Bangladesh diaspora can work on promoting, the image of Bangladesh, the kind of works that are happening in Bangladesh, and how Bangladesh is removing a lot of barriers in different areas that, without us speaking and promoting this, people will not know Bangladesh. This is one area that Bangladeshi diaspora living in Australia can do. And one other area is that they will be in a good place to identify Bangladeshi specialists who are working in different areas in Bangladesh, and they can, enhance their knowledges in Australia and then return. As I say, not only me, but a lot of Bangladeshis are returning in the country now after learning from America or UK or Australia or different parts of Europe, because we can see that there are areas to scope in Bangladesh is increasing these days. So you can hear a lot of negative aspects to that, but there are also some positive changes that has happened in the last several years. So these are the Bangladeshi diaspora can help us to learn that what are the areas that Australia can enhance the knowledge of Bangladeshi scholars. And then also Bangladeshi diaspora can work on introducing the unique needs and the unique nature of Bangladesh. That is often, there is often misperception about that in Australian media. So we increasingly need more and more, introduction of the country, the image of the country, that Bangladesh exists. Even last year, when I went to a very developed country, I had an argument with the waiter. She argued that Bangladesh does not exist, is part of India. So we increasingly have to struggle to let people know that Bangladesh is a independent sovereign country. It exists in its own right. So many part of the world, they do not have any idea that Bangladesh is a country. So this is the first thing we need to do, that the oversight about Bangladesh, or as I call it, Bangladesh blindness, need to be removed first. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point. I think it's something that comes through in the paper as well. Bangladesh is the 8th largest country in the world population-wise. I mean, it's a huge country. It's just that gets overlooked because its neighbor is so massive. But yeah, as you mentioned as well, Bangladesh is soon to graduate to out of kind of least developed status. It's had this huge kind of economic growth in the last decade as well. So it's definitely a country that we need to be paying attention to. Got time, I think, one more last question. So we do have another question about climate change and rising sea levels. And I guess the question's speaking to what level of cooperation and future planning is Australia engaged in regards to something like taking climate refugees. I mean, we've seen this happening in the Pacific with the agreement with Tuvalu, but is there anything similar on the works in the Indian Ocean? I might throw that to Jack, whether he has any ideas. Well, I think you're just on mute, Jack.
Classic Zoom error.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I think, look, it depends a little bit country to country. I know we don't have heaps of time, so I won't run through all the different relationships. I guess I would just make the broad point, which is the same really in relation to the Pacific, and that's that Australia was really at the forefront of the small island developing states and AOSIS agenda in the late 80s and early 90s, and was really engaged in that agenda and pushed it hard over recent decades. Our commitment to it has waxed and waned depending on which government is in power. And I think generally across the small island developing states, there is hesitation and caution as to where Australia's at on this issue. There's fear that with a change of government, we'd go back to a stance which is much more hostile to the question of climate change generally, let alone to climate change related migration, justice and refugees. So I think really when we think about this question, Australia is working from behind, if you like. It's got a lot of catch up to do in building trust in that we will be the type of partner rather that small and developing states can depend on for support on this issue. And I think until we're rock solid in that respect, these questions about the bilaterals and the different agreements we might be able to reach with individual countries are perhaps a little bit of a separate issue.
Okay, thanks, Jack. That's great. So we'll conclude the Q&A section there. So thank you everyone who provided questions, and thank you to the panel. We'll just move on now. We've got a recorded message from Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tim Watts. He's been gracious enough to be able to record a message for us on the paper and on the broader interest of Australia in the Indian Ocean.
Hello, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words at the launch of this new AP4D paper on the importance of Indian Ocean engagement. We live in challenging times. Multiple dynamics are at play in the Indo-Pacific region. Climate change, economic disruption, demographic evolution, and geopolitical competition all have the potential to significantly change the way our region and the world works. This paper focuses our attention on the changes playing out in the Indian Ocean region. The Indo-Pacific is a crucial maritime space shaped and bounded by the vast Indian Ocean. Australia is an Indian Ocean country. Indeed, we have the biggest search and rescue zone of any nation in the Indian Ocean. And as an Indian Ocean nation, we are committed to a region that is peaceful, prosperous and secure, a region governed by rules, norms and agreed international laws, a region where countries are free to make their own choices and choose their own path. Regional institutions like the Indian Ocean Rim Association offer an important forum for Indian Ocean nations to work together to realise this vision. As a premier ministerial level forum spanning the Indian Ocean, EORA has a vital role to play in tackling shared challenges and promoting rules and norms that benefit all countries. We were a founding member, and Australia is committed to strengthening EORA's capacity and impact. I've had the privilege of representing Australia at EORA meetings in both Sri Lanka and in Bangladesh. And we're proud to be co-leading EORA's Maritime Safety and Security Working Group over the next 2 years alongside India. Australia is also funding the EORA Blue Carbon Hub, led by CSIRO in Perth, which is building capacity and empowering EORA members to protect and restore blue carbon ecosystems throughout the Indian Ocean. Alongside our strengthened engagement in EORA, Australia was pleased to host the 2024 Indian Ocean Conference in February in Perth, our Indian Ocean capital, in close partnership with the India Foundation. The success of this event was a measure of our commitment to engagement in the Indian Ocean region. But we know there is always more to be done. As the paper reflects, greater engagement and dialogue, in as many ways as we can foster, is the key. Business, defence, closer education and government ties, we are committed to working closer with our Indian Ocean partners across the full spectrum of engagement. The Australian Government has opened new missions in Bengaluru, Kolkata and Malé, and is expanding our diplomatic footprint in others across the region. As the paper notes, Australian universities have also recognised the opportunities that exist in the Indian Ocean, from Curtin Uni to Edith Cowan and UTS. And while Prime Minister Albanese was in India last year, Deakin University announced that they would be the first university in the world to open an international teaching campus in India at the state-of-the-art Gift City. In defence, we are deepening our cooperation with key partners like India. India's Navy made 2 groundbreaking visits to Australia in 2023, one to Australia's Cocos-Keeling Islands and a submarine deployment to Perth. Australian and Indian air crews also worked side by side on joint maritime surveillance and response interoperability training in India during the Indo-Pacific Endeavour in 2023. We understand that it's the responsibility of all countries in the region to contribute to building a peaceful, prosperous and secure Indian Ocean region in the face of the dynamics of change that we all confront. Australia is doing its part across diplomacy, development, education, trade and investment and defence. Australia has been lifting our engagement in the Indian Ocean region. So thank you to AP4D for this report highlighting the importance of this agenda.
All right. Well, thank you to the Minister for those comments. I'd just like to thank everyone else who spoke today. So Marc Purcell from ACFID, Nicola Rosenblum from ACMC, the panelists from our working group. And I would also like to thank everyone who's involved in the process, as well as our advisory group members, all the officials that have provided feedback for us. And thank everyone who was in attendance today and who showed their interest and who provided questions for the Q&A section. So just a reminder that the paper now is live on our website, so you can check that out anytime from now. The link is in the chat if you want to go there. Otherwise, you can just, I'm sure if you Google AP4D, we will come up. Once again, thanks to ACMC, the ACFID staff, and the rest of the AP4D team. And yeah, please get involved, subscribe to our mailing list, and connect with us on social media. And yeah, have a nice afternoon.